In the deep dark of space, where suns burn like cold and distant candles and shadows stretch for light years, a small alien medical frigate drifted silently near the wreckage of a recent battle, its metal skin scorched from stray shots, and its engines humming weakly in the endless night. The crew inside moved with tense urgency, scanning the debris for survivors and recording the aftermath of the Galactic Council, while in the medical bay the chief, xenobiologist named Kalari, stood over a wounded human soldier who had been found barely alive, clinging to a shattered escape pod, his breathing ragged and shallow, his body marked by burns and cuts, and yet his eyes still moving with stubborn willpower that seemed impossible for someone so badly hurt. The alien nurse at Kalari's side adjusted the scanner and said in a quiet voice that the human's blood readings were strange, unlike anything they had ever seen before, and Kalari leaned closer to her, silver eyes narrowing as the holographic display lit up with flickering lines and colors that did not match any known chart in the medical archives. The sample taken from his arm shimmered faintly under the sterile light of the lab, not like ordinary blood, but like liquid fire contained in flesh, and Kalari felt an unfamiliar chill travel down her spine. For in all her decades of study across dozens of worlds, she had never seen blood react like this under the scanners. A machine beeped with warning tones as the compound inside the human's blood began to spike in unstable patterns, each spike more violent than the last, and the nurse stepped back nervously, saying that perhaps they should stop the scan before something went wrong. But Kalari shook her head and whispered that they needed to understand what this was, because if the readings were true, this was not just strange, it was dangerous, maybe even the most dangerous biological material they had ever encountered in any intelligent species. A compound did not match any known element in the galactic database, and the closest comparison was a theoretical substance found only in deep space weapons research that had been banned for centuries due to its destructive potential. Yet here it was flowing naturally in the veins of a human being, a species that most of the galaxy still saw as primitive newcomers to the stars. The nurse asked if this meant the human was some kind of biological weapon, but Kalari did not answer. She simply called for a full containment protocol and ordered the bay sealed with triple security locks, and she sent an encrypted message to the ship's captain saying in urgent tones that the human must not be allowed to leave and that all scans and findings must be transmitted to the council immediately. The captain did not like the tone in her voice and demanded to know why, but Kalari refused to explain over open channels, her mind racing through the possibilities, because if the council knew what she suspected, they would see this human not as a survivor to be rescued, but as a threat to be contained, or worse, eliminated. The human's breathing grew weaker, and Kalari felt a strange pull in her chest for those she was sworn to protect life. As a scientist, she could not ignore the knowledge that this man's existence might lead to chaos across the galaxy. Yet even as she stood there, she saw his hand twitch weakly, as if reaching for something invisible, and she wondered what kind of world could shape a species whose very blood carried such danger. The medical bay lights flickered as the ship's damaged system struggled to maintain power, and outside in the darkness, other ships moved through the wreckage. Scavengers and rescue craft alike unaware of the secret now lying in the frigate's medical bay. The nurse adjusted the life support tubes, keeping the human alive, and asked again what the readings meant, her voice shaking. But Kalari only said that it meant trouble for all of them and that they should prepare for visitors, because news like this could not be kept silent for long. Already her encrypted message was traveling through relay satellites to the hidden network of the Galactic Council, and soon high-ranking officials would read her words and demand answers, and when they learned the truth, they would act faster than Kalari could stop them. For in the politics of stars, anything that could tip the balance of power would be seized and used without hesitation. She had seen it happen before, and the memory of worlds burning came back to her mind like a shadow over her thoughts. She turned back to the human, studying the faint glow in his blood as it pulsed in rhythm with his slowing heartbeat. The compound inside seemed almost alive, shifting colors and sending tiny arcs of energy through the scanner's sensors, and Kalari realized with horror that the substance was interacting with their equipment in ways that should not be possible, as if it could sense the machine studying it. She ordered the scanner shut down, but it was too late. A small discharge jumped from a containment vial to the scanner, and the lights in the bay flickered again, this time harder, making the walls groan with the strain of the ship's power grid. The nurse stepped back in alarm, and Kalari could feel her own pulse race as she imagined what would happen if even a drop of this blood were exposed outside containment in an alien environment where it could react with foreign atmospheres or living tissue. The damage could be catastrophic, wiping out entire habitats in minutes, and this thought made her whisper to herself that maybe the universe was never meant to find this substance, and yet now it was here. And it was a man who was barely hanging on to life. Kalari felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders, for she knew that whatever happened next would decide not just his fate, but perhaps the fate of every world within reach of the stars outside the window of the bay. The distant wreckage of the battle floated silently, but Kalari could not shake the feeling that something was watching them, perhaps one of the scavenger ships, or maybe something worse, and she ordered the security drones to guard the entrance to the medical section. As she began preparing a full report for the council, the words came slowly as she tried to describe the nature of the substance, without revealing too much in case the message was intercepted, but even her careful phrasing could not hide the danger completely, and she knew that whoever read her report would understand enough to act. A human stirred faintly, his eyes opening for just a moment to meet hers, and in that brief glance, she saw confusion, pain, and something else, a spark of determination that did not match his failing body. And she wondered if he understood on some level that his survival was now a matter of galactic consequence. Kalari stepped back, letting the nurse adjust his life support again, her mind still racing with possibilities and dangers as the hum of the ship's engines filled the bay like a low warning tone. She knew the next hours would decide everything, and at the moment the council received her message, the clock would start ticking toward whatever fate awaited this soldier, this ship, and maybe even her own world. And with that thought, she turned once more to the glowing blood sample locked inside its shielded case, and whispered to herself that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the universe is not forged in a factory or built in a lab, but born in the heart of a living being. And as the stars drifted silently beyond the viewport, she felt the weight of that truth settle over her like the cold dark of space itself. In the silent corridors of the alien frigate, the air was thick with tension as the message Kalari had sent raced across secure channels toward the highest levels of the Galactic Council, its encrypted signal bouncing from relay to relay faster than light, while inside the medical bay the human soldier lay still under the watch of both medical staff and armed guards, his faint breathing the only sign that he still clung to life outside the ship. Other vessels drifted through the wreckage of the recent battle, unaware of the dangerous secret hidden within these walls. But far away in the grand chambers of the council, the encrypted signal was received, decoded, and displayed before the eyes of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, their faces darkening as they read the strange and alarming report. Kalari had sent some council members leaned forward, their voices sharp as they argued in their native tongues, demanding immediate action, while others sat in cold silence, already calculating how such a discovery could shift the balance of power. The name of the human species was spoken again and again, each time carrying a heavier weight, until the room seemed to echo with the sound of it. Across every political faction and military alliance, there was one shared truth in the minds of these leaders: if the strange substance in human blood was real, and if it could be controlled, it could decide the fate of wars for centuries to come. And so they began making decisions in hushed voices. Decisions that would send ripples across the stars. The council leader, a tall insectoid being with glassy black eyes, finally raised his voice and said they could not allow this to be ignored. He ordered that a special task force be dispatched to retrieve the human alive at all costs, and to capture any other humans found in the same sector, their blood to be tested, their bodies to be studied in secret facilities hidden far from the public eye. The order was given, and already fleets began to move from distant starports, their engines igniting like small suns against the darkness. Back on the frigate, Kalari was summoned to the captain's quarters, where the captain's expression was tight with suspicion. He demanded to know what she had told the council, and she answered carefully, saying only that the human carried something dangerous, and that if word spread, uncontrolled chaos could follow. The captain did not like half answers, but he respected her work enough to trust her for now, though he warned her that if trouble came to their ship because of this human, she would be the one to explain it to crew. Kalari returned to the medical bay to find the nurse pale and shaking. The monitors around the human were pulsing with warning signals, his heartbeat erratic, his blood pressure falling as the strange compound in his veins surged again like a storm under glass. Kalari ordered an emergency stabilizing treatment, and the nurse obeyed, their hands moving quickly, though their eyes stayed fixed on the faint glow of the human's blood, as if mesmerized by its strange beauty. In another part of the ship, a junior officer was checking long-range scans when a sudden blip appeared on the display. Multiple unidentified ships approaching fast, their formation tight, their engines hot. The officer called the captain at once, and alarms began to sound through the frigate corridors as crew members hurried to battle stations, not knowing if the Incoming vessels were friend or foe. Kalari heard the alarm from the medical bay, and her stomach tightened. She knew what it meant. The Council's decision had been swift, faster than she had even expected, and now the hunters were coming. The captain's voice came over the intercom telling all hands to prepare for possible boarding action, and Kalari realized that the human was no longer just a patient in her care. He was now the most valuable and most dangerous asset in the sector. The door to the medical bay slid open, and 2 armed guards entered there. Weapons ready, they told Kalari that by order of the captain, the human was to be moved to the secure cargo hold until the situation was resolved. Kalari protested, saying the move could kill him in his current state. But the guards were firm in their orders. The nurse looked at Kalari with fear in her eyes, knowing that moving the human now was risky, but also knowing they had no choice. Together, they lifted the stretcher and began the careful journey through the dim corridors as red warning lights flashed overhead and the ship shuddered under the strain of sudden maneuvers. Outside the frigate, the approaching ship spread into a wide net, cutting off possible escape routes, their hulls painted black to blend with the void, their shapes sharp and predatory. On the bridge of one of these ships, an alien commander received his orders from the Council. Directly his mission clear: capture the human alive and secure him for transport to a classified research station. Failure was not an option. The frigate's captain saw the formation on his tactical display and cursed under his breath. He ordered evasive action, engines flaring as the ship dug toward the cover of a nearby asteroid field, hoping to lose the pursuers in the dense rock clusters. Kalari and the nurse moved as quickly as they could with the stretch of humans breathing ragged, his eyes opening and closing in weak confusion. He muttered something in his own language, words Kalari could not understand, but the tone carried pain and urgency. The nurse whispered that they needed to hurry, because if the ship was boarded here in the open, the guards might not be able to hold the attackers back. They reached the cargo hold, where a sealed containment cell waited, its walls lined with energy fields meant to hold dangerous specimens. Kalari hesitated before placing the human inside, knowing that once the door closed, she might not see him again. The guards activated the locks, and the cell glowed faintly with power. Kalari stepped back, her mind racing with possibilities. Outside the asteroid field loomed large, jagged shadows, filling the viewport of the bridge. The frigate plunged into the dark maze, its hull scraping against passing stone as the captain pushed the engines to their limit. Behind them, the black-painted ships followed, their own lights flickering briefly as they weaved between the rocks. One misstep could mean destruction for any of them. Deep inside the ship, Kalari stood by the containment cell, watching the human's chest rise and fall slowly, wondering if he knew that the entire galaxy might soon turn against his kind. The alarms blared again, this time sharper and more urgent. The captain's voice coming over the intercom say that boarding craft had been launched from the pursuing ships. They were minutes away from impact. The guards near the cell tightened their grips on their weapons, their eyes hard. Kalari knew a fight was coming, and that if the attackers reached this room, the human's fate would be sealed. She also knew that the Council's interest in him meant they would not kill him outright, but what awaited him in their research stations might be worse than death. The nurse whispered that they should try to move him again to a place the attackers would not think to search, but Kalari shook her head, knowing there was no time. The sound of impact rang through the ship as the first boarding craft latched onto a hull. The corridors filled with the thunder of boots and the sharp echo of weapons fire. The guards took positions near the door, their bodies tense. As they waited for the breach, Kalari stepped back into the shadows of the cargo hold, her eyes fixed on the cell and the man inside as the chaos of battle drew closer like a wave about to break. The sound of battle rolled to the narrow corridors of the frigate like thunder in a canyon, the walls shaking with each burst of weapons fire, and the faint tremor of explosions as alien boarding teams forced their way inside, moving with deadly precision to the dim red-lit passages. The crew fought back, but the attackers had the advantage as a prize, and numbers of armor gleaming black in the flashing lights, and their strange curved weapons humming with energy in the cargo hold. Kalari stood beside the containment cell, her silver eyes fixed on the human lying inside as the guards by the door braced for impact. The nurse crouched behind a supply crate, clutching a medkit in trembling hands. Outside the thick door, the pounding of heavy boots grew louder, mixed with the harsh shouts of the attackers in a language Kalari did not know. The guards exchanged quick glances and tightened their grips on their rifles. The first blast hit the door, sending sparks across the floor. A second blast bent the metal inward and a third tore it open in a blinding flash of light. The attackers surged into the room, moving in a tight formation, their leader pointing directly at the containment cell, his voice sharp with command. Kalari felt her chest tighten as she realized they were here for the human. And nothing else. The guards opened fire their weapons, lighting the cargo hold with bursts of blue energy bolts the attackers moved with. Cold disciplined some returning fire, while others pushed forward using heavy shields to block the incoming shots. One guard went down with a cry of body armor, smoking the other back toward the self-firing control burst, trying to slow the enemy advance. Kalari knew they would be overwhelmed in seconds. She stepped toward the cell, her mind racing, and her hands moving to control panel. The nurse shouted something, but Kalari ignored her, instead opening the emergency, released the energy. Fields around the cell dropped with a sharp crackle. The human stirred, his eyes half opening as Kalari gripped his arm and tried to pull him from the bed. The attackers saw this and increased their advance, one of them breaking formation to rush forward. Kalari reacted, without thinking, grabbing the fallen guard's rifle and firing at the charging figure. The blast caught in the chest and sent him sprawling. The other attackers hesitated just long enough for Kalari and the nurse to pull the human free, his weak legs barely supporting him together. They half carried, half dragged him toward the back of the cargo hold, where a narrow maintenance hatch was set into the wall. Kalari slammed her hand against the control, and the hatch slid open, revealing a cramped tunnel lit only by faint guide lights. She shoved a nurse and the human inside before climbing in herself, sealing the hatch behind them as the sounds of the fight raged on the tunnel was barely wide enough for them to crawl. The human struggling with each movement, his breath ragged. The nurse whispered that he would not survive long without rest, but Kalari said they had no choice. They had to keep moving. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them away from the cargo hold toward the engineering section, where Kalari hoped they could hide until the attack was over. Behind them, distant thuds echoed to the metal walls as the attackers breached more compartments, and the ship groaned under the stress of damage. They reached a vertical shaft with a ladder. Kalari climbed first, pulling herself upward as a nurse helped the human follow the shaft open into a small service room filled with humming machinery and the faint smell of ozone. Kalari closed the hatch and leaned against it for a moment, catching her breath. The nurse eased the human down onto a crate, checking his pulse and murmuring that it was still weak but steady. Kalari's mind was already moving ahead, thinking of the council task force that must be among the attackers. She had seen their methods before. They would sweep every part of the ship until they found what they wanted, and they wanted the man sitting in front of her with glowing blood in his veins. The hum of the machinery seemed louder now, the vibration under their feet changing in a way Kalari recognized. The ship was altering course, maybe trying to shake off the attackers, or maybe being forced into a different heading by the enemy. She moved to a nearby console, activating a hidden screen that displayed parts of the ship's internal sensors. Several sections were already marked as lost or overrun. The attackers moving quickly toward the engineering section. She turned to the nurse and said they had to keep moving deeper into maintenance network. If they wanted to stay ahead, she pulled a panel from the wall, revealing another narrow passage, this one running between the coolant conduits. The air inside was cold and smelled faintly metallic. The nurse helped the human inside. Kalari following and sealing the panel behind them, they moved in near darkness, their footsteps muffled by the sound of coolant flowing through pipes on either side. The human seemed to be gaining a little strength, his eyes opening more fully, though his face remained pale. He spoke again in his own language. Kalari, catching only one word that she recognized from her research, a word meaning danger. She nodded to him, though she doubted. He understood. The passage ended at a small hatch. Kalari opening it slowly and peering out into a dim chamber lined with storage tanks. She recognized it as part of the auxiliary systems rarely used and usually unmonitored. They slipped inside, closing the hatch, and moving to a corner where they could stay hidden. Kalari crouched beside the human, looking at the faint light that still pulsed in his blood, visible through the thin skin of his arm. She could almost feel the energy coming from it, as if it had its own presence. She wondered what kind of life he had led before this battle, what kind of world could create such a thing in its people. The nurse quietly asked what would happen if the attackers found them. Kalari answered honestly, saying they would be taken, and the man would be delivered to a research station where his blood would be tested, extracted, and maybe even replicated if possible, and that if they succeeded, the galaxy might never be the same. The nurse fell silent, the hum of the ship surrounding them like the breath of some vast sleeping creature somewhere. Above there was another shudder as weapons fire struck the hull. The lights flickered, then steadied. Kalari realized they could not just hide forever. Eventually, The attackers would sweep this area too. They needed a way off the ship before it was too late. She thought of the emergency pods, but most would already be locked down or destroyed in the fighting. The only other option was a small engineering shuttle dock near the core used for repairs outside the hull. It was not designed for long travel, but it could get them away from the battle zone and maybe toward human-controlled space. If they were lucky, Kalari explained the plan to the nurse, who looked doubtful but agreed they would have to move quickly. She helped the human stand his legs trembling, but holding as they began making their way toward another maintenance tunnel that led to the engineering bay, the distant sounds of battle still echoing through the ship, reminding them with every step that time was running out. The engineering section of the frigate was a maze of pipes, cables, and glowing control panels, each one humming with the life of the ship as Kalari the nurse and the weakened human moved through the narrow service tunnel that connected to the main chamber. The air was warmer here, carrying the sharp scent of heated metal, and cool as the sounds of the battle were distant, but still present a low, constant vibration that ran through the deck like the heartbeat of some dying beast. Kalari knew that the attackers were spreading to the ship's sector by sector, their disciplined formation sweeping every compartment and forcing the defenders back step by step. And she also knew that if they reached engineering before she could act, there would be no escape for any of them. The nurse supported the human, whose steps were unsteady, but stronger than before, his eyes scanning the surroundings with quiet alertness, as if some instinct told him the danger was closing. And Kalari pushed open a grated paneled end of the tunnel and peered into the engineering bay below. The space was massive, with towering reactor columns lined in bright blue conduits, and walkways crisscrossing the open air like webs of steel far on the opposite side. She could see the small repair shuttle docked in its bay, its white hull faintly scratched from years of use, and its boarding hatch closed with only a single locking mechanism. She pointed toward it and whispered that it was their goal. The nurse nodded, and they climbed down a narrow maintenance ladder, stepping onto a side walkway that led toward the shuttle. Below them, engineers and security officers were rushing about trying to keep the reactor stable, while armed crew guarded key access points. The ship was clearly damaged badly, and the chief engineer barked orders over the noise, trying to reroute power from damaged systems. Kalari kept her head down, leading the nurse and human toward a staircase that would take them closer to the shuttle. But halfway, their loud alarm blared through the bay, and the intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice shouting that enemy forces had breached Deck 9 and were moving toward engineering. Kalari felt her pulse quicken. She knew they had to move faster. She broke into a run, the nurse and human following. As best they could, the sound of distant gunfire echoed closer. With each passing second, the walkway trembled as an explosion shook the ship, dust and sparks falling from the ceiling. They reached the base of the stairs and started up the steps, taking them two at a time. The human's breath came in heavy gasps, but his pace never faltered. At the top of the stairs, they emerged onto the upper catwalk level, where the shuttle was only 20 meters away. Kalari's heart pounded in her ears as she sprinted toward it, reaching the hatch and slapping her hand onto the manual. Override. The panel flashed red, requiring a security code. She cursed under her breath, glancing back at the nurse, who shook her head. Not knowing it either, Kalari thought, fast scanning the bay below until her eyes locked onto a security officer standing near the reactor control booth, his key card hanging from his belt. She told the nurse to stay with the human, then darted away along the catwalk, her boots clanging against the metal floor. As she descended another stairwell, dropping into the bay proper, she moved through the chaos, keeping low until she was behind the officer. She grabbed the card in one swift motion and took off before he could react, weaving through pipes and crates as shouts rose behind her. An energy bolt sizzled past her shoulder, but she didn't slow, climbing the stairs two at a time until she was back on the upper level, sliding to hatch and swiping the card. The lock clicked open, and the hatch swung inward, revealing the cramped interior of the shuttle. Kalari waved the nurse and human inside before following and sealing the door. The nurse helped the human into one of the seats, strapping him in as Kalari moved to the pilot's console, her hands flying over the controls, powering up the engines. The shuttle vibrated under her feet, the low hum rising into a deep rumble. She checked the bay cameras and saw enemy troops entering from the far doors, their black armor glinting in the light. As they advanced up the stairs, Kalari hit the release, and the shuttle's clamps disengaged, the small craft rising slightly on its thrusters. She swung it toward the launch tunnel. The attackers now firing at the shuttle's hull, sparks flying. As the metal scorched, the nurse shouted that the human's vitals were spiking again, but Kalari had no time to look. She shoved the throttle forward, and the shuttle shot into the launch tunnel, the walls blurring As they accelerated toward the outer hatch, the frigate's automated systems tried to block the launch, sealing the outer doors, but Kalari overrode them with the stolen keycard, and the doors slid open just as they reached them. The shuttle burst into open space, leaving the frigate in the chaos behind. For a brief moment, Kalari felt relief, but it vanished as the sensors lit up with multiple hostile signatures. The attackers had ships outside, waiting their sharp black holes, already moving to intercept. Kalari swore under her breath, pushing the engines to maximum, the shuttle shaking as it sped toward the cover of the asteroid field ahead. The black ships closed and their weapons locking on. Kalari weaved the shuttle through jagged rock formations narrowly, avoiding collisions while bright streaks of enemy fire flashed past. The nurse held a human steady, his eyes half open, his lips moving in silent words. Kalari glanced at him once and saw the glow in his veins pulsing faster, almost in rhythm with the ship's shaking. She forced her focus back to the flight path, diving the shuttle deeper into the asteroid field. One enemy ship clipped a rock and spun out in a spray of debris, but two others stayed on, her tail relentless in their pursuit. Kalari scanned for anything that could help her lose them. Spotting a narrow crevice between two massive asteroids, she angled the shuttle toward the gap barely wider than the hull. The nurse shouted a warning, but Kalari didn't slow, guiding the craft through with only centimeters to spare. The pursuing ships tried to follow, but one struck the rock wall and exploded while the other pulled away, unable to match the maneuver. Kalari exhaled a shaky breath, but knew they were not safe yet. The shuttle's engines were overheating, and the asteroid field was only a temporary refuge. She plotted a course toward a nearby nebula, hoping its ion storms would scramble enemy sensors long enough for them to slip away. The nurse checked the human again, saying his condition was worsening. Kalari asked if he could survive a rough ride, and the nurse hesitated before answering yes. If they were quick, Kalari pushed the shuttle onward, weaving between drifting rocks and bursts of glowing gas. The enemy ships were nowhere in sight, but she knew that did not mean they had given up. The council would send more, and soon as the nebula's swirling clouds grew larger in the viewport, Kalari allowed herself one last glance at the man who had become the center of the storm, wondering what kind of future awaited them if they survived the next hour. The station drifted in the endless dark like a lonely island of light and metal, and Captain Wren stood on the high deck looking at the flickering screens as new reports streamed in from every corner of the frontier. The situation was getting worse, and the whispers about human blood had turned into loud cries in every council chamber of every alien world. And while most feared what it meant, there were some who saw an opportunity to gain power beyond measure, and they were moving faster than anyone could stop them. Wren knew that the information could not be contained much longer, because the smugglers who had stolen samples during the first incidents had already sold them to factions that valued destruction over peace, and soon the black markets would overflow with vials of red liquid, each drop capable of triggering chaos beyond comprehension in the wrong hands. In the cargo bay below, Wren's second officer Vela moved between rows of sealed crates, her eyes sharp and her hand resting on her sidearm, because she knew that what they carried was not just another shipment of minerals or spare parts hidden in one of the containers, was the last safe supply of purified human blood in this sector, meant to be delivered to a secure laboratory for research to find a way to neutralize its terrifying effects. But Vela could feel the tension in the air like the hum before a storm, and she knew that more than one set of eyes was watching their every move, waiting for a chance to take it. Meanwhile, far from the station, on a fractured moon orbiting a dying sun, a shadowy meeting was taking place in a cavern lit by pale blue fire. The figures gathered that belonged to different species, some with scaled hides and glowing eyes, others with insect-like limbs and metallic shells, but all of them shared one goal: to obtain human blood and use it as a weapon against their rivals. A tall figure draped in dark cloth spoke first, saying that the humans had hidden their true power for too long, and that the galaxy had been blind to the danger until now, and if they were to survive, they needed to control this force or be destroyed by it. The others nodded, some murmuring agreement, others clicking their mandibles in approval, while secret deals were struck and plans were set in motion that would bring bloodshed to worlds that had known peace for centuries. Back on the station, the human ambassador Jonas was pacing in his quarters, his mind racing, as he recalled the last transmission from Earth that had been short and filled with urgency, telling him that more ships were on their way, not to fight, but to protect, because the Terran Council had decided that every drop of human blood outside their own territory must be accounted for or destroyed before it could be misused. But Jonas feared they were already too late. The rumors alone had been enough to stir panic and fear, and now that fear was growing into hatred, many were beginning to see humans not as allies, but as dangerous creatures whose very biology threatened the balance of the stars. The first signs of trouble came when a freighter bound for the station failed to respond to hails, and when patrol craft were sent to investigate, they found it drifting lifeless in space, its cargo holds empty, and its crew gone without a trace. Vela read the report in silence, feeling the weight of what it meant. Someone was hunting for the blood, and they would stop at nothing to get it. She told Rin that they had to move the shipment now, before the enemy closed in, but Rin knew that rushing would only draw more attention, and he ordered the crew to stay calm and keep to the shadows, hoping that stealth would serve them better than speed. But stealth was a fragile shield, and it shattered when the alarms blared and the station shook under the impact of heavy fire. Enemy ships had come out of the void, their sleek black hulls bristling with weapons designed to tear through the fences like paper. The docking bays erupted in chaos as security forces scrambled to repel the attackers, while civilians fled deeper into the station corridors, thick with smoke, and the cries of the frightened Rin barked orders over the comms, directing Vela to secure the cargo while he took command of the defense. And in that moment he knew that the battle was not just for survival, but for the fate of the galaxy itself. Because if the attackers took the blood, nothing would stop them from unleashing on a scale that no one could imagine. In the cargo bay, Vela and her team worked quickly, sealing the crate into a reinforced pod and loading it onto a small courier ship. But the enemy was already breaching the outer doors, and she could hear the clash of weapons and the roar of explosions growing closer. She fired back at the dark shapes pouring, their forms barely visible through the haze of smoke and sparks, but she held her ground, buying time for the ship to warm its engines. Every second felt like an eternity as the enemy pressed harder, determined to break through and take what they had come for. Above the chaos, Jonas forced his way to the command deck, determined to speak with Rin face to face. He told the captain that there was one desperate option left. They could destroy the shipment themselves before it fell into enemy hands. It would be a loss beyond measure, but better that than letting the blood become a weapon. Rin hesitated, knowing that Jonas was right, but also knowing that the loss would crush what little hope remained for a peaceful solution. Before he could answer, the deck shook again, and the lights dimmed as another barrage tore through the station's defenses. Outside in the cold black, the enemy flagship loomed like a predator circling its prey, its captain watching the battle unfold with calculated patience, waiting for the moment when the defenders would falter and the prize would be as he knew that with the blood in his possession, no power in the galaxy could challenge him, and that knowledge drove him to push harder, sending wave after wave of fighters against the station until its shields flickered and the air inside began to thin. Vela's voice came to the comms, telling Rin that they were almost ready to launch the courier, but that the hangar doors were stuck from the last hit. She asked for cover fire to give her team a chance, and Rin ordered every available gun to focus on the ships outside the bay. The gunners obeyed, unleashing a storm of energy bolts that lit up the darkness. But even as the enemy faltered, more were on the way, drawn by the scent of victory. Jonas stood at the viewport watching the madness unfold, and in that moment he felt the heavy truth of it all. Human blood had become more than a resource, had become a symbol, a thing that inspired both fear and desire in equal measure, and as long as it existed out here beyond Earth, it would be hunted, fought over, and spilled in endless wars. He knew that their choices in the next few minutes would decide not only whether they lived or died, but whether the galaxy itself would survive the storm that was coming. The courier's engines roared to life, and Vela's team pushed it forward inch by inch toward a narrowing gap in the hangar doors. The enemy was closing, and their weapons flashing through the smoke. But the little ship surged ahead, breaking free and devoid of its trajectory, already locked on a distant, safe point. Rin exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived as another explosion tore through the command deck, sending consoles flying and plunging the room into semi-darkness. The battle was far from over, and the cost of protecting that single crate of human blood was only beginning to be counted. The station was now under high alert, and the corridors were filled with flashing red lights and the low sound of emergency alarms that seemed to make every breath feel heavier and every shadow seem alive. And in that moment, Captain Arlen walked with heavy steps, his boots striking the steel floor like the ticking of some ancient clock, as if the station itself was counting down to something terrible yet unknown. And around him soldiers moved in tight formations, weapons ready, eyes sharp, but no one dared to speak, because they all felt in their bones that something bigger than they could imagine was about to happen. And while the walls of the station were thick and the shields were strong, everyone knew that the real danger was not outside, but inside, hidden in the blood of one man, who now sat locked inside a reinforced cell deep below the main deck, where no windows existed and no sound came in from the outside world. And his name was Jason, human whose veins carried something that had sent Fear racing to the hearts of alien scientists and warriors alike, because the moment they had studied his blood, they had seen the patterns of strange microscopic shapes, the wild, pulsing energy that was not just alive, but somehow more than alive, and it was this same strange essence that had turned a simple medical examination into a full-scale galactic crisis, for what they had found in his blood was not a virus, not a parasite, not even a chemical in the usual sense, but something that moved, like thought, and reacted like instinct, and when it touched alien cells, it did not kill them the normal way. Instead, it changed them, and in a matter of seconds, they became stronger, faster, and almost impossible to harm. But this change came with something darker, because those who were touched by it began to hear things, whispers that told them to act without mercy, and see every other life form as a threat, and the scientists who had seen this effect in the lab were now gone, either dead or locked away in quarantine. And the few who were still free spoke only in short broken words, their eyes empty, as if they had looked too far into something no mind was meant to see. And so Captain Arlen had been given orders from the Galactic Council, orders that were clear and cold, to remove the human from the station and deliver him to a secure location where the blood could be studied in secret away from the eyes of the public. But the captain knew this was not so simple, because already there were whispers in the station halls that certain alien factions had learned about the human and his blood, and they wanted him for themselves, and some wanted to use him as a weapon, while others wanted to destroy him before his existence could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. And as the captain made his way to secure lift, he could not help but glance at the sealed door ahead, the one that led down to Jace's cell, and in that moment something happened. The alarm stopped, the lights flickered, and the air grew still in a way that made every hair on his arms rise, as if the station itself was holding its breath. And then, without warning, the emergency comms came alive with a voice filled with panic, saying that an unknown vessel had docked without clearance, and that armed figures were moving to the lower levels fast and silent like predators in the dark corridors. And the captain knew immediately what was happening. Someone had come for the human and the blood inside him, and so he ordered his guards to form two lines, one to block the intruders and one to secure the prisoner. But even as he gave the command, he heard in the distance a strange sound, not quite footsteps, not quite machinery, but something like a pulse moving through metal, and the sound was getting closer with every passing moment. And then the lights above them began to dim again, not from power loss, but as if something unseen was drinking in the energy itself, and when the lift doors opened to take them down to the prisoner level, the captain stepped inside, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, while his mind raced with thoughts about what he might find, and whether he was walking into a rescue or a trap. And when the lift reached the lower deck, the doors slid open to reveal a corridor half in darkness, and half lit by the pale blue glow of emergency strips along the walls. And the guards moved ahead, slowly, weapons raised, scanning every shadow and every doorway, but the silence was heavy and wrong, and it was then that they reached the cell, only to find the door open and the human gone, and in his place lay two alien guards, their bodies still, but their eyes wide open as if frozen in some moment of shock. And from the look on their faces, it was clear that whatever had taken a human had done so without effort and without fear, and the captain felt his throat tighten as he realized that the whispers about the blood might not be just about what it could do to others, but also about what it could awaken in the one who carried it. And now Jace was out there somewhere in the station with his strange blood flowing, and no one knew if he was a victim or something far more dangerous. And as the captain turned to issue new orders, the lights went out completely, and in the sudden darkness a voice came from the shadows, low and calm, saying that the galaxy was not ready for what was coming, and that nothing they could do would stop it now. And then footsteps moved away, fading into the black, leaving behind only the cold truth that the station was no longer a place of safety, but the starting point of something that could change every star, every world, and every living being in the galaxy forever. The chamber shook with the roar of engines above as the last defense ships left orbit, carrying the refugees from the burning skies. And in the center of the control hall, Captain Wren stood before the giant display, showing the enemy fleet drawing closer, its shadow covering the light of the nearby sun, as if the universe itself wished to hide what was coming. And around him the crew moved with a strange calm that only comes when fear has passed beyond the point of screaming and has settled into the cold acceptance that this is the final stand. And yet there was still something in their eyes, a spark that refused to go out, and that spark was the reason why the enemy had come here, because the spark was made of blood, human blood, the very thing that had thrown the galaxy into chaos. The science chief Alara was at the far console, her fingers moving quickly over the glowing controls, her voice steady. As she read the readings and confirmed that the serum was stable and ready, she glanced at Rin. And there was no need for words, because they both knew the plan. They both knew that the serum was not a weapon in the way most thought, but a living force, something born from the strange mix of human biology and the void radiation of the battlefields it had touched long ago, and that it carried within a reaction so powerful it could end fleets without firing a shot, and yet it was also the one thing that could save them if used with care. Outside the hall, the ground trembled under the distant impacts of enemy bombardments, the air filled with the deep hum of shield generators struggling to hold together the last barrier over the city, and down in the streets, people hurried into the last shelters, though they knew it might not matter, because once the enemy broke through there would be no mercy. The war had gone beyond strategy, and was now driven by fear and hate and the knowledge that humans carried in their blood the thing that the galaxy feared most, a force that could change the balance of power forever. Rin remembered the first time he had heard about it back when he was a young officer, and the whispers told an alien scientist who had discovered a strange reaction inside a drop of human blood, a reaction that seemed impossible according to the laws of known physics, and that scientist had vanished within a week, his research erased from every network. But the truth had already spread, and like all dangerous truths, it had grown in the shadows, until now when it stood at the heart of this war. The enemy flagship loomed on the screen, a massive shape of black metal and shifting armor plates, its weapon ports glowing faintly as it adjusted position and prepared to open fire on the shielded city Rin knew. They had minutes, maybe less, and he looked at Alara, who gave a single nod before initiating the sequence. The serum would be carried into the heart of the enemy fleet by a small drone too fast and too small for their defenses to hit, and once there would awaken, not to destroy, but to broadcast a signal, a biological call, that only certain beings could hear and respond to, and those beings were older than the stars themselves, the silent watchers who lived in the dark between galaxies, creatures the size of continents, who fed on energies beyond imagination, and who had always remained apart from the petty struggles of smaller life. As the drone launched into the sky, cutting through the upper atmosphere, like a flash of silver light, the crew watched the screen in silence. The enemy seemed unaware, or perhaps unconcerned with the small craft moving toward them, their focus fixed on breaking the shield. But then a ripple passed through their formation, as if some unseen wave had touched them. The glow of their weapons flickered, the patterns of their ships shifted slightly, and then the flagship paused, its massive guns holding fire, for a heartbeat too long. And in that pause, the first shadow appeared, not from the enemy, but from above, as something vast moved between the system's sun and the fleet. The watchers had come, drawn by the call and the human blood, the soundless message carried by the serum. And what followed was not a battle, but a quiet erasure. The watchers did not fire weapons, they simply passed through the enemy fleet. And wherever they went, the ships vanished, not destroyed, but taken somewhere beyond sight. Their presence was overwhelming, a weight on the mind and the soul that made even a hardened crew feel small and fragile, and yet the watchers did not harm the city. They moved with slow precision, removing only the fleet that had come to end humanity. When the last of the enemy was gone, the watchers turned, and for a moment it seemed they were looking directly at Rin and Alara, as if they could see through the walls of the control hall and into the hearts of those who had called them, and then without a sound they left, drifting back into the deep black beyond the stars, leaving only the faint shimmer of their passing and the echo of their power in the minds of those who had witnessed them. Silence filled the hall, broken only by the soft crackle of the comm channels, as reports came in from the surviving defense posts, confirming the fleet was gone, the shields still holding, and the refugees safe. For now Rin felt the weight of what had happened settle over him, the knowledge that they had survived not through strength of arms, but because of something inside them, something unique to humanity, that the galaxy could not understand and could not control. And that knowledge was both a gift and a danger, because now more than ever they would be hunted not for conquest or territory, but for the secret in their blood. Alara stepped beside him, her expression unreadable, as she looked at the displays showing empty space where the fleet had been, and she asked quietly, what happens now? And Rin had no easy answer, because he knew this was not the end, only a pause in a much greater story. The Watchers had intervened once, but they might not do so again. And the enemies of humanity would not stop searching for ways to use or destroy the power they feared. And so the only path forward was to keep moving, to keep learning, and to protect the secret as long as they could. In the streets below, people emerged from the shelters, blinking up at the clear sky, where minutes ago fire had rained down. They would tell stories of the great shadows that came from the stars to save them, and those stories would spread across worlds, growing with each telling, until the truth was hidden beneath layers of myth and wonder. And perhaps that was for the best, because the less the galaxy knew, the longer humanity had to prepare for the day when the Watchers might not answer the call, or when the call itself might fall into the wrong hands. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the city, Rin gave the order to begin evacuation. The war was far from over, and they could not stay in one place for long. The serum was secured deep within the most guarded vault, and only a few now knew the exact nature of its power. Even fewer understood the cost of using it, and as the ships lifted into the sky one by one, carrying the last offenders and the seeds of future resistance, Rin stood, watching, knowing that the galaxy would remember this day not as a victory of weapons, but as the moment it truly began to fear the blood of humankind. And he also knew that fear was both the greatest threat and the greatest shield they would ever have.